So, our final talk for l'Exposition Imaginaire, and I welcome Forrest Nash. And I didn't know about it when we met in person for the first time a couple of days ago. And yesterday, when we prepared a little bit the talk for tonight, he told me that he initially wanted to become an artist. And it's great. You studied at in Chicago?
The School of the Art Institute of Chicago.
Yeah, so great. We will talk about this later, if Contemporary Art Daily is an art project or not. You are here. We have a very stiff subtitle. I just realized it today. It talks about Contemporary Art Daily and current strategies of digital art magazines.
Yes, I noticed that.
Yeah, you noticed that. Why didn't you complain?
I'm happy to talk about these kinds of strategies, but I also think, there's been so much that's come up that's so interesting from this symposium that, there's quite a lot to talk about. So I don't envy you trying to narrow our conversation.
No, not at all. But I would like to start with Contemporary Art Daily, and it's for many reasons. And I saw it growing in the past years. And I belong to the frequently. I'm using it frequently, I have to say. So in a way, from the very beginning, and then I stopped a little bit, and then I started again. And I started again because, in the very beginning, and it started as a blog.
Yes.
Can you, before I ask questions, can you really maybe summarize a little bit why, where, how?
Sure. So, Contemporary Art Daily was the first project I worked on beginning in the fall of 2008. I was still in school at the Art Institute, and I think by the end of my studies, I was very clear that the thing that I wanted to do most was learn about the work of other artists and to study other artists and to come to know them. And I was quite frustrated by what was a very real lack of access to knowledge about what was happening throughout the world. So I had started to meet a few collectors in Chicago, and I had started to meet a few professional art dealers, but they could give me a very opinionated perspective that they had gathered from traveling to art fairs or from material that was being sent to them on the basis of their commercial participation in the art world. But I couldn't really formulate my own idea of what was happening in the world, and I couldn't, construct a group of artists that really mattered to me, except through the limitations of my very narrow purview being a student in Chicago. So at the beginning, Contemporary Art Daily was really just a situation I created for myself to have to do research. If I needed to find at least one exhibition every day that I felt was somehow important in this kind of international context, then I would need to be looking at dozens more exhibitions every day to try to make that judgment. So at the beginning, it was very much, I think, a project for myself and for maybe a small group of friends who I was talking with all the time about art. And it was only after several months, I think, that two things happened. One, people that I didn't know started to look at it and get in touch with me, which was quite a surprise. And two, I started realizing that I think maybe because of the fact that I was selecting certain kinds of exhibitions, galleries and later museums were willing to share very high quality documentation with me that otherwise was not publicly available. And they were giving me this material largely without restriction and letting me share it. So once I realized that maybe some other people might be paying attention and that I also could use Contemporary Art Daily as a lever to bring some of the knowledge that I had been so frustrated not to have out into the public sphere, I think it became a much more serious focus of my attention and much more urgent for me to kind of build it into something which is more reliable. I mean, at the beginning, I was very much sort of scraping together to meet this daily demand. And over the years, now I have wonderful colleagues that help me, and we have a much more kind of professionalized system. But I think, yeah, those two things really changed it from a personal project into something more ambitious.
And from the very beginning, you have never missed a day. Is that right?
We've never missed a day.
It's like, where does it come from? Hanne Darboven, once did.
I think, yeah, in the beginning it just came from my own personality, which is that I tend to set rules for myself. I can't, moderate something reasonably in my diet. I have to set a restriction that this can never be in my diet. Or, I can't try to get a little bit more exercise. I have to set some routine, which maybe is why I often fail to exercise. I think, the daily structure just at the beginning was kind of a personal thing for me, but I've come to realize that it's very useful, I think, for a set of our audience that incorporates it into their daily routine. One of the most common pieces of feedback I get from all different kinds of people is that contemporary art daily is what they look at, maybe together with a newspaper as they're having their morning coffee. And I think over time, as, for example, it's now possible for us to publish quite a lot more if we wanted to, we still try to keep to a small number of exhibitions published on this daily rhythm because it's something that really fits well into people's lives, and it can function, I hope, as a rhythm that's at once, a reliable part of the fabric of daily life, but is not overwhelming. You don't have to be refreshing it all day, every day, to make sure you catch all of the 16 exhibitions that are published. And so, yeah, maybe in the beginning it was more about me, but now it feels like something that we try to protect.
Yeah, but it's a nice rhythm, I agree, instead of working out, just going to the website.
Yes.
Yes. In the morning. But and I know that all people ask you that. It's in which way is that is your, especially contemporary art daily, curated or not?
Yeah.
Or is it a subjective? What is it? Do you like all posts? What is really your strategy behind beyond daily?
The way I think of it is that hopefully there's a balance between two motives that often compete with each other. So on the one hand, we do have a curatorial motive or a kind of a motive to influence the conversation of contemporary art by advancing the artists that we especially care about. So of course I have certain artists that are important to me, and I want those artists to be more visible in the world. But on the other hand, we also have a motive for breadth and a kind of a more journalistic motive, I would say, to represent imperfectly, but to try our best to represent the diversity of things that are happening within this broader art conversation. So often we do publish projects which have very little interest to me, or even sometimes, as a collective staff, we will have quite a lot of problems with, just because we think it's important to acknowledge that it exists. I very much believe that not just the meaning of art, but the very nature of art and the activity of artists is formed in relation to what other artists are doing, that you can't understand one artist or one group of artists in isolation. And so, of course, this is an impossible thing to ultimately achieve, but we want to try to give some kind of a broad view of the landscape of art that is affecting the artists that we care about the most and is helping to create our understanding of them.
You're talking about the business model behind. It started as a blog.
Yes.
So, and then at one point you registered it as a non-for-profit organization, as a business model. I think this is also what people don't know about it. It's a non-for-profit. I think this, would like to go a little bit deeper into it. As a non-for-profit, this is quite unusual in this, if you call it a magazine, but for a website, a non-for-profit organization, which can't be hitchhiked by by your, I don't know, by Facebook or yeah. So, or did people already ask you if they can buy it and get it out of the non-for-profit sphere and make it into a commercial site?
So the change came about 4 years after I initially began working on Contemporary Art Daily, and of course, by 2012, Contemporary Art Daily had already grown quite a lot, and we had a fairly substantial audience. And at this time, I was having many conversations with people of varying degrees of firmness about how I should translate this attention into a business. And I found it very stressful. On the one hand, it's a bit exciting to be told that something you're doing has a potential value, and a value which could help me live an easier life. But on the other hand, the concerns of a business publisher were completely opposed to my own interests. So in addition to the fact that I know very little about business and I know very little about advertising, I had also already in the later part of 2011 been thinking about sort of the second major project that I wanted to produce, which is called Contemporary Art Quarterly. And that project is just inherently very poorly suited to the models of digital advertising-based businesses. It's inherently going to have a very small audience forever, and it's not at a fast pace, and it requires a tremendous amount of labor to produce. And so I think as I got more invested in the idea of Contemporary Art Quarterly and more committed to bringing it about, I started to realize that becoming a nonprofit was the only way to align what I cared about, which was realizing these projects, with the funding sources of the organization.
And who is funding it?
So right now it's a mixture mainly of 3 sources, and we're hoping to add to this list of sources, but we have sponsorships from venues. So galleries and museums can pay a small annual fee to be promoted in the sidebar, for example, very generously, the Kunsthalle Wien. And we've intentionally tried to keep this price as low as possible and to approach as broad and diverse a group of sponsors as possible for this category, so that we can still feel very comfortably a kind of independence. If one exhibitor is angry with us because we don't exhibit any of their shows on Contemporary Art Daily, then we can say no, because they're only a tiny percentage of our funding.
Yeah, but I think this is, when something gets public in a way, not as indirectly public as a business model, being a non-for-profit organization, people claim ownership.
Yes.
And of course they complain.
Yes. Yeah, I definitely understand. I think the approach we often take, and this happens quite often, multiple times each week, that we get a very unhappy letter because we have declined to publish something that someone is incredibly passionate about. For us, it's sheerly a function of numbers. So we're looking at anywhere from 1,000 to 2,000 exhibitions each month, and we have to narrow this to about 40 that will actually be published on the site. So we're considering...
Who decides in the end?
So it's a process of filtration. So we are monitoring all of the venues which are in our directory. There's, I think, around 1,000 right now, and we try to keep track of everything that's happening at those. I narrow down that very large band into a smaller pool. My colleague is tending to our submissions. We look at many hundreds of submissions each month, and he chooses ones which seem like they might fit for the site, and then gradually we reduce this pool until there's a final meeting with a group of finalists that we kind of decide a week at a time. We have like a final meeting where we kind of construct a week of exhibitions, and sometimes something will come up at the last minute that will get introduced, but usually we're deciding ultimately in this meeting, and we all have a kind of consensus. We don't vote exactly, but we have a process for deciding.
The usage of reading magazines changed in the last 8 years, of course. But when I got reinterested or visited your site more frequently again, it started when a little bit in the time when I started here working in Vienna, and then I realized that artists, when we have one-person shows, really demand and really ask why is my show not published on Contemporary Art Daily? And this is so interesting. So this is really a new, for me it was a new phenomenon. It's not about, because it's not a site where you can read reviews. It's more about a very, let's call it a neutral advertised, you can definitely visit shows. I do it too, no? I go when I go through it, and I said, okay, interesting, maybe I should go there. But how is your relationship with artists, or do artists donate?
Actually, yeah. So in addition to the sponsorships, we have the ability for the public to donate, and by far, when we put up a notice on the website asking for the support of our readership, the most generous donations come pretty much uniformly from artists, which, I think is very flattering, of course, but also I hope we try to reciprocate in that we consider this to be a big part of our responsibility. I think all of us are most interested in artists as an audience, not only because we are so we take so much from their work, and our whole project is built to reflect their work back into the world, but also because I think our kind of view of the world, as opposed to as was discussed in Dieter's very interesting talk, is not so much, we don't think so much about encounters with objects or with dead things in a room as much as we do thinking about encounters with the minds of artists, which can happen, of course, through the experience of an object that artist has made, but can also happen through reading a text that they've written for an exhibition, or seeing documentation of a project that they made, or watching an excerpt of their video. So I think we have a very kind of artist-centric worldview, and it's been very rewarding to be supported by artists in that way.
Artist-centric, Western-centric.
Say again?
Western-centric.
So this is something we think about a lot, and we have quite a lot of agony over this question of being Western-centric. I think we have a very genuine conflict. On the one hand, we do not want to be structurally exclusive. Of course, if we're choosing only 40 of 2,000 exhibitions in a given month, that requires excluding a lot, but we actually try fairly hard to find, for example, geographic diversity among the shows that we publish. At the same time, we're trying to reflect a very particular conversation between artists and gallerists and curators that is inherently, at least in its present incarnation, limited to only certain places. So we, for example, think quite a lot about the premise of establishing links between both galleries and artists. If an artist has had a show at this institution and has also had a show at another gallery, then we can connect all of that gallery's artists to all of the artists that have ever shown here and establish a sense of community between them. We can't sort of claim to be trying to reflect and reveal a system if we were also to unilaterally expand the boundaries of that system. For example, by going into a place which unfortunately has been excluded from, a given art world, and transposing the activity of artists in that place into this conversation by ourselves. So we try very hard when we notice something, for example, that many people won't be able to see in person, we tend to favor that. We were talking about an amazing project in Bali that we've published multiple exhibitions of, and for us it's particularly exciting that it's not something that our audience is likely to be able to see very easily.
To visit, especially from rural areas, as not necessarily from geopolitically, it's something else. But it's what I really like is that you limit yourself to one. In a way, one a day, and that diverges also very much from efflux.
Yes.
So this then you don't have any ambassadors, let's say, in Russia. Yeah.
Yes.
So does it matter where you are located? I know that you moved from Chicago to Los Angeles about a year ago, and you're a team of 4 people, just 4 people.
Yes.
Are they all located in LA, or does it matter?
Well, there are 2 that are still based in Chicago, and then there are 2 of us now in Los Angeles. There are 2 ways that are most important to me that I think it doesn't matter. First of all, for us operationally, it very much doesn't matter. Even when we were all in the same office in Chicago, we were all, wearing headphones and typing into a chat room, and there was very little that happened outside of the space of our screens, I guess. So it's been fairly seamless as an operational transition. But I also think it incidentally doesn't matter too much where we're based. For me anyway, because of my own personality. So I like to stay home, and I don't like to go to too many events, and so I don't feel, for example, now having been in LA, like deeply assimilated into the art world community there. Maybe this will happen over time, and my perspective as a thinker about artists will be more so determined by my location in Los Angeles, but for right now, I think, just by virtue of not being a very social person, I'm fairly insulated from the particular conversations of the place that I happen to live. I do think in the future, if we were able to have more resources, I would like to include more people in our editorial or curatorial or whatever process where we could have perspectives included from a broader array of places, but for right now this is just a logistical impossibility.
Are there any thoughts to add some to Contemporary Art Daily, not quarterly? What I'm missing sometimes is a site, a review every day. So, and it's that could also. I'm also thinking again as another business model, which would feed the non-for-profit organization from another side.
So there are a couple of answers to that. First is that we have a kind of very mysterious symbiotic project that has arisen, which is often wrongfully attributed to our organization, which is called Contemporary Art Writing Daily, that for a certain group of people I'm often being asked about. They produce roughly every day a review of one exhibition which has been on Contemporary Art Daily. So they write using the JPEGs, I suppose, and it's a very particular...
Do you know that?
I don't. It's completely anonymous. One of them emailed me at one point because they wrote something which had a kind of personal implication about me, and so they wrote me a letter to kind of half apologize about that, but I don't know who they are. Sometimes I'm really quite interested in the things they write, sometimes not as much, but I do feel very happy that they exist because it creates this secondary effect where when we publish something, especially something by a young artist or an exhibition space that's not in a major capital that has the infrastructure of a critical apparatus, we're often leading to a text on this site which is the only text written about a given exhibition. So for now, we have this kind of unauthorized help in this dimension. I can imagine in a future in which I somehow learn how to raise money that we could do something like have a kind of critical fellowship where we support a given writer to write texts about projects on Contemporary Art Daily. I think there would need to be, for me, a kind of clear demarcation of that person's voice as separate from any kind of institutional voice of ours. I think for us, we try very hard to avoid, as much as we can, steering the experience of the artworks and exhibitions that we represent. I think part of what's so wonderful about art is that many people have very different backgrounds and approaches to it, and we've heard quite a lot, especially from artists that are very passionate about our site, that this is actually what's so important to them, that it's a way that they can experience art without the prism of someone else's way of seeing art and of seeing life. And so I can imagine something like that in the future, but it would have to be very kind of clearly separated, I think.
But then it's also a matter of taste, and you definitely feature some artists more than others, if I can say, Rachel Harrison, we talked about it, and I looked it up, and I thought, wow, why? Yeah, that's curating, that's editing, that's...
yes, I think that's where we have started to be much more assertive, especially with the Contemporary Art Quarterly project. I'm very comfortable with the idea that me personally and our organization together can decide that certain artists are especially important and maybe therefore worthy of special attention by our audience.
Can you open the site?
So as a brief introduction, Contemporary Art Quarterly, roughly every 3 months, we don't have a strict schedule so far. We choose 3 artists and we build very deep archives of their work. So, for example, Peter Fend, we have material going quite far back, all the way to the 70s. So we are not only receiving digital material from recent projects, but we are producing digital images for the first time from analog media. We are including texts that have never been published before by the artists. We're including talks where we can. And we're trying to both create a kind of much deeper and slower experience to balance against Contemporary Art Daily, but also we're trying to be much more explicit in our endorsement of a certain set of artists. If we're publishing an artist on Contemporary Art Quarterly, it's not for a journalistic reason, it's because we really believe in them and we think that the public has an interest in learning quite a lot about their project, and we think that anything we can do to sort of support the artist in this project is also something that's important to us, and we kind of have to do it that way because so far it's a huge amount of labor and it does not really contribute anything to our financial situation.
But you can live from it somehow, yeah?
Yes, well, mostly we live from the economy of Contemporary Art Daily, which for now is very much subsidizing the production of Contemporary Art Quarterly. We're hoping one day to get maybe like some grants from some private foundations, but we're still learning how to do that. But yeah, we really do have quite strong opinions about art and artists, but we also, again, specifically only I think in the Daily project, we do also want to contribute to a kind of broader understanding even of the work that's not especially important to us.
Are you interested in then, there's so many art magazines around the world, and some die sometimes, and theoretically you also could buy one or continue one. And are you interested in, getting one in your portfolio?
It's interesting.
It could be. I'm still so much interested about the business model in a way, how to have that different legs who feed each other.
Yeah, I must say I've never thought about the idea of us one day theoretically acquiring an existing publisher of critical material, I definitely think that could be a very nice solution. And we do think of the projects very independently as kind of part of an umbrella. I think it will probably be quite a while before that is the focus of our attention. We have a number of projects that will probably take some years to be able to realize that are, taking all of our effort and resources. But in a theoretical way, I think it's quite interesting to imagine.
No, I'm just playing,
Yeah.
So I'm just
It's very interesting.
Why should this die? So it's
Right.
it's a very interesting model, and we also talked about it and it's exactly 21 years ago, and I didn't know about this. It was already so long ago. I was a huge fan of a German-speaking website founded by the art historian Christoph Blase. It was called Blitz Review. And it only existed for a couple of years, from 1995, I think maybe to 2000. It means in the extremely early days of internet, slow internet. It was also no images. It was really review. I forgot if it was in English or in German only. I have no idea. So and this, and I thought, if this would have been funded 10 years later, I'm pretty sure it would still exist. And but those projects, I think they need to change. But it's an interesting question where you will grow into. But speaking about numbers, now I'm interested in your numbers there. Is it growing in numbers? Yeah.
So I'd say over the last 2 years or so, we've largely stabilized. I confess I don't look at the numbers too often, but we have an annual audience which is fairly stable, around 1 million so-called unique visitors per year. I think for me, I only get frustrated when I think about these numbers because it's so difficult to understand who these people are. So some number of the million are people who are Googling the name of a particular artist because their professor told them they needed to see this work, and they see one exhibition and that's their only engagement with us. And then there's another audience, which of course is not a million people, who are engaging with us every day and who are also presumably part of the fabric of the art world. And I think I'm much more interested in this sort of much smaller audience because I want to support not only sort of the broad public having access to this material, but I also want to support the research of the people who are thinking in this field, and I want to make it easier for them to see as much as they'd like to see. And so if there were some way that I could know more deeply who these people are, I think I would be a bit more invested in it. It also is very obscuring because I don't know, for example, maybe the number of people who are passionate about art who look at our site has doubled, and the number who followed some weird link on some website that I've never seen is going down, and it's balancing out, and we're staying at 1 million even though our audience is completely changing. And I think now it's technically possible to kind of use cookies and follow people after they leave our site and figure out exactly who they are, but we don't do that.
Both Contemporary Art Daily and Contemporary Art Quarterly are very, very low-tech composed. Why?
There are pragmatic reasons. I actually do almost all of the coding for our project. So we have a freelance team now that helps us with some of the most challenging work, but of all the many thousands of lines of code for our project, they're either open source or I've written them myself. And not only am I not a great coder, but I also don't have enough time to even breathe many days. And so because of this, we have a very sort of strict budget, you could say, on the time that we allot to the development of new technology. So by the time we actually are able to execute a new feature or a change to the site, it's been necessary for many, many years. We're actually, every summer we put up a little note and ask for donations, and this year for the first time we're going to do an experiment asking for our audience to help us fund something very specific, which is we'd like to make some relatively simple changes to the layout of Contemporary Art Daily, but that will especially enable, one, the site to load a bit faster, and two, we'd like it to be a bit more viable on smaller screens. So right now, you can kind of get by looking at Contemporary Art Daily on something like an iPhone, but it's not ideal. And so we're hoping that maybe this year, if we meet our goal, that we can make the first changes to that site in quite a while. But yeah, I'd say it's partly these pragmatics, but it's also because we don't want the technology to be foregrounded. We don't want to have some kind of like crazy animated map which lets you zoom around to different artists and everything's blinking, because of course we're presenting highly expressive material already. And so we see our role as kind of trying to get out of the way and also trying not to be too deterministic. For Quarterly, the obvious model that I thought about a lot when we were developing the project is the catalog raisonné, which has a similar kind of attempt at comprehensiveness. The thing that we do that's quite different is we allow a flexibility in presentation. So you can click on this settings button and you can decide to view the archive as a list, as a big scroll of images, or only as a slideshow. You can organize the material chronologically by the name of the venue, by the title of the project, or even randomly. There's an option to sort of shuffle the projects. So we do this on purpose because it means that we are not dictating the manner in which you experience this artist's work. We're not prepared to say that the correct way to understand Peter Friend is as a chronological sequence of developments, nor are we prepared to say, of course, that the best way to understand him is a random shuffle. So we try to, both keep from having too much distraction, but also, and we'd like to do even more of this, we want to make it possible for people to see the material as flexibly as possible and with as little direction from us as possible. Of course, there are some things that we influence. We can't escape the fact that we're framing these things in some ways, but we try to minimize that where we can.
Any ideas to go into the from the virtual to the physical? You could open a space, or
we've thought about different ways to do that. The first thing is that we often get asked about kind of like books as translations of the projects, and this is a very easy answer, which is it's completely impossible. For example, if we wanted to represent the material of Peter Friend's archive, the book would be very, very, very huge with very, very small thumbnail images. So we've mostly eliminated the idea of books as a kind of physical medium. I think for us, in general, the internet is important because it allows for a kind of efficiency. So as a small organization with only 4 people working together, we're able to serve a very, very large audience every single day, as compared to, for example, a mid-sized museum in the United States, which can have a very small audience, which only visits once or twice a year in most cases. I think that's a kind of unique possibility of the internet. We have a kind of ability to serve very efficiently in the narrow way in which we serve. I also just think that we don't have much institutional expertise, for example, in things like the developing of exhibitions, or people have suggested to us that we do a program of editions partnering with artists. We don't. I've done very sort of limited, quiet work organizing a few exhibitions, mostly together with my husband, but no one on our staff has experience, working in a gallery or a museum. So I think we tend to like to stick to the things that we feel especially qualified to do. And this tends to keep us from venturing too far away from this kind of core project of making documentation available online.
Are you still an artist? Or is this art? Sorry.
No, it's fine. I struggle with this question, and I have a couple of friends who are very convinced that this is an artwork and who tell me all the time that no matter what I say, they understand it as an artwork. I think for me, I think all the time about how much I still would like to do that for me is part of this same direction. So for me, if it were an artwork, it would not be finished. And so I almost can't really say.
Yeah, it's interesting. For me, it's more art than created.
Yeah.
You know? So this is why I'm always Anne Darboven. I like it in a way. So, but she had another strategy, of course. Yeah. But also it was also a strategy behind it. Was not all. Was not science what she did. And I'm really interested. Let's see how you will develop and where you will go with your different strategies. And
I think, part of my answer to that question is always out of a very almost like sad humility, which is that I don't feel like confident that there is a particular merit to viewing these projects through the lens of artwork or me as an artist. And if one day I were to kind of make that claim, I would want to feel like there was something to be gained from considering the projects that way. Likewise, I don't call myself a curator most of the time because I know that there are quite a lot of dimensions to that role as it has existed for many generations that are not part of my work. So I tend to be quite shy about any of these labels only because, one, I don't feel like I completely understand how the projects are as a kind of finished expression, and also because I know that artists and curators have to make a very important decision to identify that way, and I don't want to be kind of casual in choosing one of these roles without really feeling like I understand and can own it. I have a bit of training as an artist, which was largely unsuccessful, especially according to my peers, and I have no training as a curator. So maybe one day I'll go back to school and get a clearer profession, but
you can write your PhD about your own stuff, it's already part of history.
Maybe that sounds like an artwork to me, a kind of a PhD on myself would be a very interesting
Why not?
project. Yeah.
I would like that.
We can work on it together.
Yes, I need one too, by the way. We have a few moments to open up to the public. Yes, we can also go on. I like that. Yeah?
Sure.
So, but we should include our audience. If there are any questions. Oh, not one.
Yeah, it's been a
yes.
Do you think your work is unique, or do you have some connections? There was one Austrian in London, I think, something like war. That's part of his name, something. There is also somebody in Austria, in a place called Ausstellungsbrücke, who it seems does something similar. Would you know about that?
I don't know the projects you mentioned specifically, but I definitely think that we are not unique amongst the landscape. There are quite a lot of people publishing exhibitions from all different kinds of positions, and also I think more broadly throughout culture. Of course, we are part of a broader wave of trying to organize the tremendous amount of information that's now available. So when we started, of course, people were already producing digital documentation of exhibitions back in 2008, and I think we were part of a group of projects that were trying to take this material that was being produced and connect it with an audience that very much wanted to see it. But no, we are certainly not unique. I think maybe it's unusual that we are a not-for-profit and that we do not exist as a kind of a normal business. I think it gives us a kind of a different perspective, and maybe, yeah. Oh, go ahead.
No, but I think it's a very. I also don't think it's unique, but it's non-unique. It's
right.
Of course around. It's also in other language groups, which are, English has the advantage of being the global language. Yeah, there are definitely many ones in other languages. But one question to the non-for-profit organization: do you have a board?
We do. We have right now a very small board who I convened in the beginning to help me with some of the kind of initial fundraising. One of the things I'd like to do, probably not by the end of this year, but next year, is really expand our board. So we're hoping to add people to it also from other places around the world, and to make it a bit more active. Right now they're, they help me when I ask them, but they're a fairly quiet group, and so this is something that I'd like to do in the future, is to have a more robust board.
Forrest, you made me like the internet again, so thanks for your presentation. Just a quick question. It's funny to land on this particular page, because it says there that Peter Fendt had a show in 1990 in the Instituut voor Nieuwe Medien.
Yes.
The Institute for New Media.
Yes.
I wonder what was new in 1990. But so I'm quite curious. But anyway, what I was curious about is how far back do you go? And so what's the oldest show that you document? And does that in any way help to define what's contemporary? Because of course, to name oneself Contemporary Art Daily also implies a theory as to where the contemporary starts. And is there any interest that you would have in theorizing it further by deciding to make date X a cutoff point? Or?
So, to answer your first question, the oldest projects we've published so far are in the late 70s, Peter Fendt, and then we have, I think, only projects from the 80s for Lutz Bacher. For me, this question of scope is applied not to projects or documents, but to artists. So we try to decide, both for quarterly and also for daily, whether we would consider a given artist and therefore their project in general to be contemporary or part of our purview. And then for me, it's sort of incidental when their chronology begins. It's very confusing at the margins. For example, there's this practice that's been happening for the last many years, at least with a new enthusiasm of kind of retrieving either artists who are rather old or who have passed away, and treating their careers the way, both in the market and kind of culturally, the way you would treat the career of a young artist, sort of introducing them and making their work very available to collectors who are collecting kind of work which is happening now, even if that artist's project began in the 70s. Peter Fendt is an example of this. I think he had a tremendous career for quite a long time and then has been relatively quiet, and then now there's especially one gallerist in New York, Maxwell Graham of Essex Street, but also now others who are kind of trying to bring him back into the world. And so this creates a challenge for us, because on the one hand, especially with an artist who's deceased, say, it's hard to argue that this artist's work is contemporary explicitly. However, it is very much participating in the conversation that we're looking at, and the work that we are seeing at the venues that we monitor sometimes includes this older work. So we don't have an entirely robust theory of this, except to say that we try to determine on an artist level if a given artist is deceased or not, playing a kind of active role in the conversation amongst artists and thinkers about art that we are looking at as deeply as possible every day. From the beginning, there are a couple of artists, for example, who I would love to make archives of who have passed away. And I think where it gets very slippery and confusing, especially maybe in a few years as more people are familiar with the Quarterly Project, is what role we would or could play in this kind of bringing about of a new conversational role for an artist who has maybe either passed away or is at the end of their career. And to be honest, yeah, I think I'm still very much trying to understand this.
As a non-for-profit organization, they get commercial galleries are buying now estates, and
yes,
it's still a relatively new phenomenon, and you can tell that they step into it when artists are old, in their 80s or ill.
Yes.
So, and it's a bit perverse sometimes, I think.
Yes.
But indeed, there are so many artists who are not commercially successful, but we know all about, we know it's but very important for art historically, very important. Maybe that's also something what can
yes, I think
be part of it.
Yeah, I think we try not to think too much about the market directly, insofar as we also don't know very much about it. Like, I have very little information about how expensive different artworks are, or I can sort of secondarily see success by virtue of where people are having exhibitions, but I don't have a lot of direct access to the market, and so we try as much as possible to stay separated from this. But of course, in many cases, both good and bad examples, galleries are the agents of bringing this material out in a way that
not of all. As only of some.
That's
so
true.
This is I think it's very limited.
Yes, it's true. And maybe in the future it would be interesting for us to try to take a more active role in finding projects ourselves that have no kind of momentum behind them, and see what it means to make an archive of someone who isn't participating at the moment. But we haven't really gotten there yet.
It's already an archive, and this is what we were talking about a lot in the past weeks here in our L'Exposition Imaginaire, and great contribution. Thank you very much, Forrest.
Thank you for having me. Thanks everybody for coming.